Hi.
Hello.
I'm gonna make an interview to Ryan about the inclusive education. Okay, Ryan, what do you do here in Rennes?
Yes, so my name is Ryan Connell and I am the Student Experience Manager at Rennes University College. What that means is I help students have a positive experience and experience life in Canada by planning many activities, but also helping students practice their English outside of Canada and building their leadership skills.
Okay, what is inclusive education in Canada?
Inclusive education in a Canadian context means that you are providing education in a way that is accessible to all people. So there are many people who have different abilities and skills, and they are students who might have disabilities, for example. It could be students who have learning disabilities and might have difficulty learning in a classroom. And so when we think about inclusive education, it is considering the needs of all students and what are the ways that we make sure that everybody has the ability to learn.
Okay. How do you help students with special needs in Canada?
There's a lot of legislation, laws that are in place that require that Canada has to be accessible for all people. And that doesn't just mean people with disabilities, it does mean that also. But it also means how do we create education that everyone can access? So if it means having a disability, but also it could mean having English as a second language, right? Many times it could be hard for someone whose English is not their first language to access education in Canada. But by law, we have to make sure that everyone can learn. And so for us, there is laws in place in Canada. In the province of Ontario, we have a law that's called the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. We call it AODA. And in this act, it is saying that not just does our physical places need to be accessible, meaning, for example, if you have a wheelchair and you can enter a building or that you can learn inside a classroom. This law says you need to make sure that everyone can access that space. But it also means you have to provide customer service in a way that helps to meet the needs of each person. So for example, if someone has a disability, you have to find ways to help make sure they can still get what they need. If someone has a student whose English is not their first language, you have to be able to provide customer service in a way that helps them. And so there are laws in place to make sure that when you provide education, that anybody, no matter their ability, their race, their language level, their gender, their sexual orientation, that they have access to education.
Okay. What are the institutions responsible for helping people with special needs, maybe with disabilities?
Sure.
Mainly?
Yes.
Yeah.
So part of this law with AODA also means that universities and colleges have to provide support for people with disabilities. So in Canada, all universities and colleges will have an office that's called a Disability Services Office. At the University of Waterloo, we call it the Accessibility Services Office, because their job is to make sure that students have access to education and that we can help, if they have a disability, to help them meet whatever support they need so that they can learn. So for example, this office would help to make sure that if a student has a learning disability, that they can have extra time when writing tests or quizzes in class. If they have a visual disability and maybe they are blind and cannot see, that they can access their class material in a different way. So if instead of a textbook, if they can't read, that maybe they can access class notes or class material in Braille, and so they can read it even though they can't see. And so Canadian schools have a legal responsibility to provide education that is accessible for anybody. And so these accessibility services offices help with that. And they help to make sure that teachers and that staff at the school they follow the law and what is required of them.
Okay. What are the support programs guaranteed by the Canadian government for people with special needs? I mean, what kind of support the government gives these kind of people?
Yeah, so the first thing is these type of supports would normally come in through the provinces in the government. So if a student or an individual has a disability, they can receive funding and be registered through our Ontario's Disability Support Program. This program helps to provide money so that people with a disability can survive and they have money to live on, and help to make sure that they can access education. So many individuals who might have a disability can have difficulties finding work and to have a job. And so they provide support with funding, but they also will provide support with finding a job. And they will help with the training and the skills needed for someone with a disability to successfully get a job. And so they are responsible to help with that. They can also help with enforcing laws so that they can have access to work, that schools have a responsibility to educate, and so they help to do that through the laws and the legislation that they put in place. There's also many community services, and they are funded by the government, and they help to provide support for people with disabilities. So, for example, we have services called the Independent Living Centers. They are in each city, and the Independent Living Centers help people to be able to live independently without needing to rely on someone else. So sometimes that means helping to provide personal support workers or someone who can help come into their home to help them. Sometimes it just means helping to promote or advocate for their needs.
Okay. What are the accommodations that can be made within the schools?
Good question. So for a student with a disability, you can access support in many ways. Well, first one is if you first have to be registered through the Disability Service Office. And once you are, then you get to meet with a disability counselor. They will meet with you to discuss what are your needs. What sort of ways do you need help to be successful in school? For some students, that might mean I need more time on a test, and maybe I need to write my test in a separate location. Many students with a learning disability have troubles focusing when they are writing a test, and so they can receive that additional help. Sometimes if it's a physical disability and you are in a wheelchair, or you might have a visual impairment, so you're blind, then they would help to make sure that the teachers provide any materials you need in the language that would work for you. They also have, we call adaptive technology. This is different types of technology that students can access that help them with their learning. So for example, they can also access what are called screen readers, meaning that it would read text to you on a screen if you were blind, and you could listen to your textbook instead of having to read it.
Yeah.
And so this technology you can access through a disability services office on a school campus.
And all the Canadian schools have this kind of technology?
Exactly, yes. So it is part of the law because as long as they are public universities or schools. So, for example, University of Waterloo, it receives money from the government. In order for them to receive money to fund students, they have to provide this type of technology. They have to provide counselors to help. Otherwise, they are not meeting the legal requirements to receive the money. So all public universities in Canada are required to have a disability office, and they would provide technology support and counselors that would help for all students.
Okay. So do you think the strategies used to these people at the school are adequate?
I think the biggest challenge we have is I think if the services are available to students, they're excellent. The biggest problem that exists at Canadian schools is the amount of help available. What I mean by that is there are counselors available who can meet with students. However, I think there's not enough counselors that are available. So the difficult part is the schools are required to provide help, but there is not exactly a requirement of how much help, meaning that many schools could be hiring more staff that could help students with disabilities. Because a frequent problem is that while the service is available, there can be a long wait until you can meet with a counselor. So you might be waiting a couple of days or a week or maybe 2 weeks to be able to see a counselor when you need help. I think what Canada needs to do is continue to provide more funding, more money that can help hire more counselors for our students. In the past 15 years in Canada, there has been a large increase in students who are registered through disability offices. Part of this is because in Canada, what's also considered a disability is students with mental health concerns. So for example, a student who experiences depression or anxiety or has other mental health worries, they can be registered with a disability based on that mental health concern, and then they have access to these services. What becomes difficult is that because we provided more education and more awareness about mental health in Canadian schools, more people feel comfortable to go and get help, which is awesome, right? You are able to share, I have this problem, I need support for it. Now the problem is that there's not enough help to help all the people who need the help. And so that's the biggest problem we have in Canada, is that there is help available, but we need to provide more money and resources so that there's even more counselors available to help.
So that's all in my interview, but I want to know if you know something about how is the trade or the interaction with the children in elementary schools. You know how the people or the government as well try to help the support
children, yes.
in elementary school.
Yeah. So in a similar way, I talked about colleges, universities. In elementary school and high school, like the primary school, the students would instead have what are called EAs, educational assistants. These are staff who would attend the classes with the students and would help them while they are in class with helping to learn while they have their disability. And so sometimes they might sit in class with a student who has a disability, or sometimes they might attend other additional classes with the student after school. Sometimes they might also be in their own class and teach in their own class. And so in primary school, there are these, we call them EAs, and then there's also personal support workers, or PSWs. And the personal support workers, they help more with more severe disabilities. So if someone has a disability and they cannot use the washroom by themselves, for example, they would attend classes sometimes with the student also. But in Canada, we have many people that are in each school that are educational assistants, and they would help with creating a learning plan for each student so that the teachers can know how to also teach and support that student with a disability. Again, though, one of the challenges also is in primary school and high schools is money. That there's more money that is needed to fund more of these educational assistants. The government is required to help provide this support in every school. So every school should have an EA, but the challenge is that there's more students with disabilities, and it can be hard for the EAs to help in every classroom. So that becomes a common problem.
Okay. And what happened with the parent? I guess all the parents help
Yeah.
for the health
Correct.
that their children's.
Yes.
If what happened if one of these parents cannot or they don't want help.
Right.
Just
So, like to help in the school, it is their own decision if they want to be able to help, but it depends on every family to decide how to do that. The educational assistants are really the experts to help, and so parents aren't expected to know everything to do on how to help their child, but they are normally the best experts because they've been with them such an early age. But they don't always have to attend classes with their student or anything like that. There isn't that expectation. The expectation in school is that the educational assistants take place of the parents so that the parents can still work and not be there during that time. Sometimes families might have a parent that will choose to come in the class and be with their student because maybe they're worried about the help their student is getting, but it's not a requirement for a parent to be in the class. The expectation is actually on the government and on the school to provide the education for their child. Because in Canada, it is expected that all children in Canada have the right to learn. And if that means they have a disability, it still means the government and the school has a responsibility to teach that student. So they have to find the resources and support to make sure that child can learn.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're very
That's
welcome.
all for this interview.
I hope that helps. You're very welcome.